Hey guys, welcome back for another thought for the day. So today we are on part 2 of O.I.L from The Last Dance, and today I want to talk about identity. So before we go into talking about what we see in The Last Dance and we talk about what we see biblically, I want to just define what identity means. And so identity is who you are, the way you think about yourself, the way you are viewed by the world, and the characteristics that define you. So it's important to understand that there are these four parts that go into identity, and knowing that these things can all work together to make and to show and to expose and to blossom something that's great. But all four of these things can be fractured and cause for restriction, and for things to not be pushed and moved in the greatness of who you are. And so we see through The Last Dance this exposure of the power of identity. And so if we simply just look at Michael Jordan, we see that he was made to be a powerhouse, right? Like his father, his mother pushed him, his family pushed him to be something. And in pushing to be something, he knew that pushing was to be like a great person, a great basketball player, and he then caused for society to see him that way. And he allowed for the characteristics that were inside him to also align with this identity of getting a great basketball player and being a champion, right? And so there is importance for us to be in alignment with these things that will call us into greatness. But it's also important to understand that there will be things, there will be frictions that will stop and not allow for the true identity, the true us to show up and to be present. And we have to be able to push past that, right? So we can be called to be one thing and we can know that we're going to be one thing, but we ourselves can stand in the place of stopping that, right? How we see ourselves, or the way society sees us can stop that. Or we don't develop the things that are inside us that would allow for our identity to blossom. That's deep stuff. That's good stuff. Okay, so when we look at the Chicago Bulls, is to understand that they were not a great basketball team before Michael Jordan got there. Their identity sucked. And it's to know that they were able to reframe their identity. And now when you see or you say Chicago Bulls, you immediately think Michael Jordan. You immediately think 6 championships, right? Derrick Rose might come to mind, but you immediately think Michael Jordan. So in that, our identities can be reframed. It's also important to understand that when we are developing our identities and when we are coming into forming our identities, that we align ourselves with things and with people that are going to work with those identities. So Dennis Rodman, Scottie Pippen, Phil Jackson, Steve Kerr, Michael Jordan, they are an awesome team focused on wanting to achieve, wanting to be able to be pushed. And in that, they all have the identity of having a being a basketball player, right? And it's also really clear too that even in looking at Michael Jordan and him being great, that there were parts of him that could have been or were restricted by identity, right? So we see that in the episode where they talk about him coming back and him wearing 45, and then him having to switch back to 23 because 23 was his identity that ignited him, right? So you may need to go back to the thing that's going to ignite you to the next level. But it's so much there, right? So it's so much there. But I want to just go to the Bible and really hold up some of these through biblical light, because that's why we're here. So from a biblical perspective, we know that our identity begins and is formed through God. So Genesis 1 and 27, Genesis chapter 1 verse 27 in the New King James version says, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. And then Jeremiah chapter 1 verse 5 in the New King James version says, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I sanctified you. I ordained you a prophet to the nations, right? So in these two verses, we are able to see that who we are, what we are supposed to do, that begins with God. So God called us out to be something, to do something, and our identity must begin. How we view ourselves must begin with God. So when I read the definition in the beginning, I pointed out it's who you are. So who did God call you to be? You can't and you shouldn't be defining yourself outside of the concept of your creator, right? I cannot define what a phone is outside of Apple. Apple is the creator. So what the phone is able to do, how the phone is able to operate, can't be done outside of what the framework of Apple provided it to do. Can we divert from that? Yes, you can divert from that. But that is a whole nother conversation. So we must first go to the fact that our identity is first formed and established with God. And in that, our identity is based off of some bigger plan, some bigger purpose that we need to connect with, right? So when it is said to Jeremiah, or when it's said in Jeremiah, I ordained you to be a prophet, right? I formed you before you knew. I formed you in the womb. Jeremiah was called by God to be a prophet for a reason. The Israelites needed someone to declare the truth of them. Whether we want to like it or not, Michael Jordan was formed for the Chicago Bulls. They needed a win, right? Like, they needed a transformation, and he was able to provide it. So we have to understand that we are formed for greatness, for whatever piece of greatness that looks like, for however that transforms worlds, right? And to say that, and to really understand that, and to really make the grounding of that concept of Michael Jordan being created for the Chicago Bulls, in the sense that what he did with the Chicago Bulls ignited and transformed people's minds, the way they move, and how they may move and transform in industries. So it is to understand that we are formed for a purpose, and that purpose is bigger than whatever we could ever imagine or think. And our simple movement, our simple identity will transform and transition the lives of someone else, right? And then holding up that our identity is for a purpose. So 1 Peter 2:9 says, but you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Our identity has a purpose. And I don't know what the identity is for you, what the purpose of your identity is, but it is for a purpose. And so, and to understand the purpose, you got to go back to God, right? There is this shifting back to God, but our identity has a purpose. So never think at any moment, at any point, that who you are, how God created you, whatever is inside of you is not for a purpose. It is for a purpose. And in that identity is to sit and to consider all of the deep-rooted things that go along with it. So in today, spend some time asking yourself, what's my identity? Who did God call me to be? Who do I view myself to be? Who does the world view me to be? And what are the things, what are the characteristics that define me? Those are 4 hard questions, but those are 4 hard questions that you should spend some time looking at and considering. There's so much more I want to say, and I'll probably get into all of that on the blog post that will be attached to this at a later date on O.I.L Cipher. But know that it is really important for us to consider, who did God call us to be? Who do we view ourselves as? Who does the world view us as? And what are the characteristics that help to define us, right? Ask yourself those 4 questions today. Get into it. Spend some moments to consider that. But then remember that no matter what it is, that our identity should be formed and should be rooted in God. So it doesn't matter how the world see us. It doesn't matter how you may see yourself. just remember how God sees you.